Committee meeting. I want to welcome our student representative, Abby Adicula, and our teacher representative is under the weather and unable to join us today. I want to welcome Sarah and Chuck, and I assume Lydia will be along shortly. Mr. Batchelor's running a few minutes behind, and that leaves it on Mr. Petiti to kick us off with some administrative remarks.
No administrative remarks tonight.
Okay, then. Let's then move right into public comment. The public commenters ready? Great. Welcome this afternoon on this lovely sunny day. It's on.
Good afternoon, Judy Sherry, Governor Circle, Newtown Square. Most of my comments are related to the responses to the questions I asked prior to this meeting. So I'll start out with number 2 question in October's list. My question from this response is, how does the response to October question number 2, which references September question number 2, answer the question involving students and parents that was asked? The response given references employees. Number 3. Is it correct to assume that the administrative liaison for each committee is responsible for the answers to public questions? If that's the case, then who is responsible for responses to questions at the board's business meeting? Is that the superintendent? Number 4, are all board members in agreement that all the answers to the previous month's questions should be posted at noon before the next month's committee meetings? Number 5, why don't board members review the responses to public questions before they are posted? Number 6, since the school district has apparently missed several important township meetings, including recent ones on stormwater, doesn't it make sense to develop a process to ensure regular communication between the two boards? Number 8, since you're talking about goals tonight, I asked why doesn't the board use SMART goals? The response was, each year the school board does their best to set goals based on identified priorities and needs of the district. These goals are realistic, actionable, deliverable, necessary, obvious, and relevant. And my question here is, why doesn't the board believe that goals should be specific and measurable? Number 13. Why wouldn't board members want to be treated the way they treat the public and follow the golden rule? Wait to have their questions be fully researched with written answers from the administration. What's so different about the public's questions? And my final comment is, unrelated to the questions, is does any board member monitor what is being shown on the educational channel to see what the public is viewing? And if not, wouldn't that be a good idea? Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Sherry. Any other public comment this afternoon? Hi, Mrs. Spurtle.
Afternoon. Cindy Spurtle, Wayne. I have one question, and that's a question related to my question that was on the Q&A, and that is concerning the goals for 18-19. And I know the planning will be discussed this evening because that was the answer to the question, but what was attached is everything that was handed out in the in the September meeting, or the October, the October meeting, we're in November. And there are, and this was the 17-18 timeline and goals. So will there be changes for 18-19? Are there different goals that are going to be planned and discussed this evening? There is no information included in tonight's agenda concerning the new goals, if there will be. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you. And I think that concludes public comment, and we'll move into the approval of minutes. Committee members, you approve the minutes. Everything looks good. Abby? Okay. Terrific. Then let's move into our first agenda item, which Mr. Petiti will walk us through the outcome of the election and how that could impact on our planning for the upcoming legislative breakfast and any other legislative visits we might have here like we've had before.
So yeah, we can run through these quickly. For our elected officials, as of January 2019, as a result of the November 6th election, Jen O'Mara will be our state rep for our 165th district. She will replace Alex Charlton. Greg Vitale, he is an incumbent. He remains as our state rep for the 166th. Mary Gay Scanlon, she was elected as U.S. congressional rep for the former 7th district, replacing Pat Meehan's unexpired term, and then she'll take over as the 5th district rep, congressional rep. Tom Wolf was reelected as our governor. John Fetterman was elected as the PA lieutenant governor. Bob Casey was reelected as a PA senator. And Pat Toomey was not up for re-election. He currently serves as our PA senator. So all of that means that those new folks will be reached out to in the coming weeks to try to plan our legislative breakfast for January or February, because we wanted to wait until the election ran its course before we reached out to those offices. And it's a good thing we did because, we lost Charlton. So now we'll be reaching out to Jen O'Mara to see if she'd like to join us in February or January. Excuse me.
Great, thank you. And I think I'll turn it over to Abby. Do you have any questions? You had asked a little bit about the legislative breakfast earlier. Do you want to pull the mic closer to you and push the button? And here comes Lydia.
When will a date be set for the legislative breakfast?
Abby, so that depends a lot on the reps here that just got elected. So we'll give them a call, their offices, and we'll see what kind of works best for those 2 months. We have a couple days during the week that one of the representatives' staffers told us work better. I think that was Thursdays and Fridays. So we'll try to focus on those 2 days when we run the schedule past the other representatives.
Okay. Also, sorry, but I'm allowed to come to that, right?
Of course.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you. Very
Not only allowed, but encouraged.
Thank you.
So,
I really want to meet them. So.
okay, terrific. Thank you. Any
Want you
other?
to.
If you think of any other questions, just let us know. Sarah, do you have any questions based on what Michael said?
Abby asked my questions. That's good.
Chuck?
I just have a couple.
Sure.
I guess the one thing I'd like to do is discuss whether we should send letters out thanking Representative Charlton for all the work that he has done for us, whether we want that to come from the board or whether we want that to come directly from us. Also, I think as a government relations committee, we should just send out, before we try to schedule a meeting with them, let's send out congratulations. Congratulations, we look forward to working with you, and then hit them up in a little bit. Okay, so you really don't want to mix the two things. So we congratulate them for all their hard work and dedication. We look forward to working with them towards educational goals.
I think that's a great idea, and it's an opportunity to share with them what our committee is about. So if we can add that in too, not every district has a government relations committee. And so it might be nice to give them a little lay of the land as part of that too, if that's okay. Michael and Lydia, did you have any?
Well,
Michael just gave the rundown of the.
I'm not finished yet.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Okay.
And then the other thing that we also do want to include is the fact that now that we have a student representative who's very interested in the political scene, that she would like to know more about it specifically. So if there's some information that they have for her that they can contact her, would they be able to contact you? Would you be willing?
Sorry, it's Spanish. Yes, I can give an email.
Well, what we can do is we'll send it through Michael, and then
Okay.
he'll send it out, okay?
Yes, sounds
We do
great.
it that way so that it's not directly to you, okay? All right. Thank you. That's about all I got.
You sure?
Great ideas.
They were
For
good-
now.
Good ideas. Come on,
I'm
keep them
done.
coming.
Yeah, you're good for the year now. Did we decide who wanted to? We talked about the thank you letter to Charlton. Was that something that we want to send as a district in terms of the signature line, or is that a government relations committee?
I think we could send one, but we'll bring it forward to the board. I think it would be good for the board to discuss whether they would want to send one or not.
Okay. I'll make a note that you guys will talk to the full board about that before we send something out.
Okay, and I just also wanted to mention that Senator Dalen Leach is still our state senator. He was not up for election either this past election cycle, so that just sort of completes the roster of both state and federal representatives of Radnor. And the other thing I wanted to mention is that historically we have invited our national representatives, our U.S. congressmen and senators to come and speak. Usually they don't show up, but they send a staffer. But, you know, it's always worth asking, and that typically occurs in May or June. So they come to a government relations committee meeting, and they give us kind of the lowdown on what's going on at the federal level, and we often have questions for them about federal legislation that impacts education. So I just wanted to make sure that everybody's aware that that's upcoming in the not-too-distant future, and maybe Mr. Petiti, you can sort of put a placeholder in the GRCC calendar for that and do a little outreach around that as well. Lydia, we were just reviewing the election results in terms of how that impacts our upcoming activities. And if nobody has any further questions or great ideas, we can move on to the next agenda item. Okay? All right. So that was agenda item number 1. More details forthcoming on that. And agenda item number 2 is a wrap-up of the 2017-18 two-year legislative session. There was a flurry of legislation that became law that impacts school districts in the last few days of the session, and Mr. Petiti will walk us through that.
Quickly, we'll go through each of the acts. There's 10 in all that all became law before the end of the session. Act 80 was SB 1090, which expands Pennsylvania's anti-hazing law to apply to public and private secondary schools. All this information should be in more details in your PSBA reports. Act 82 was from HB 1386, which makes changes to the way special education teachers are certified. Act 95 from HB 163 requires the suspension of operation privileges of any person 21 years of age or younger for conviction or adjudication of delinquency for terroristic threats made against any school property. Act 105 from HB 1228 allows students during school hours or at a school-sponsored activity to wear some protective clothing and use a topical sunscreen product without a physician's note or prescription. Act 111 from HB 1840 has to do with workers' compensation. It's a very lengthy explanation if you want to look into Act 111. Act 119 from HB 2052 requires public school entities to provide access to support services if a student's parent is deployed for active duty, notifies the school, and requests additional supports. Act 155 from SB 1007 provides for training and qualifications of the Assessment Appeal Board and Auxiliary Appeal Board members. Act 156 from SB 1078 amends the Sunshine Act to allow a public agency to discuss security measures while in executive session. Act 158 from SB 1095 establishes a performance-based system that provides rigorous assessment strategies under 4 options for students to show they are ready to graduate. Measures of success are appropriately aligned to a student's career goals and reflect the expectations, coursework, grades, activities, and achievements earned. In addition to the Keystone exams, alternative tests and other factors can be counted toward graduation. Act 159, finally, is from SB 1098 and it amends the vehicle code to allow the installation of automated side stop arm camera on school buses that can be used to capture violations of drivers failing to stop when red lights are flashing.
Great. Does anybody have any questions about any of that legislation? That's what happens at the end of the session, because whatever doesn't pass as the session's about to close literally goes into the waste bin and needs to start over again from scratch in the next legislative session, which will begin in January. So legislators are scrambling to get their bills passed, and it sounds like a lot passed, but at the end of the day, I think only 5 to 7% of bills introduced in any given year end up becoming law. So Chuck?
That just follows up with the Senator McGarrigle, who was very active in the Keystone legislation that came out. I'd like to discuss if we should, he also is up for re-election, and he also was not re-elected. So besides congratulating the person, well, we're not going to go there, but we will, if we could, just send him a thank you for all the work that he did for us for that. It was a great first step forward. So I'd like to see whether the committee would like to move forward with that. Just basically thank you for all the work you did pushing this Keystone piece. He worked hard to get it done. He's not ours.
Was he one of our representatives?
No.
No, he's not ours,
No.
but he was crucial in getting it passed.
Yeah,
You can't stay, you really can't, with the government relations, we can't stay within Radnor. We cannot stay within our little area here if we want to have an effect on public schools and we want to have effect on public school education,
You sound like me.
okay?
You sound just like me, that it's
Okay,
bigger
well,
than
then I'll
Radnor.
listen to you.
Okay, but I don't think in this regard we should single out people that aren't from our district, because I think other legislatures have done way more for education than
Pat,
just this piece by that
Not
individual.
for that particular bill.
Yeah, but I don't think he voted in
he
favor of the budgets
He
that would have helped us
He
more.
spearheaded
so-
that bill. It's directly related only to that. Thank you very much for working
Yeah.
on
Well,
Keystone
you could-
legislation that brought it forward.
You could send that from you because
No, I
you were
wouldn't send
intimately
it.
involved in
I-
that. I don't think it
I-
should come from the committee.
But I think I'd like
in
to
that
have more
regard.
discussion about that.
Well, I think sounds like it could be a very healthy debate, and it's one that's probably
Well, put
worthy
it
of
on
bringing for
our-
the full board to talk about. I think I hear what both people are saying. I know that our board passed a number of resolutions opposing Keystones as a graduation requirement, and I imagine that's where Chuck's coming
Right.
from, is that he
We
sort
have
of
to help each other.
took a board stance and moved it forward, but it certainly is, there are many sides to any issue, and bringing it forward for the full board to discuss, I think, would be a great idea.
Well, we could do that. I think the other piece is you have to remember, we work with other senators. We work with Senator Dinniman very closely on this particular issue. And it was Senator Dinniman and this senator who worked together, and he decided to take the piece over, and it was pushed forward bipartisan through everybody. So I think we do have to look at what we're here for, and I think that's part of what we're here for, because that's just the start of it. We want to continue to move it, because it's still not where we want it to be, and we need people to realize that if they do work for us for the direction that we want to go to, at least we're thankful. That's all, and we show our appreciation.
I know, but you're taking one isolated case of all the voting records of those individuals. So I think we have to be
Now-
really careful if we're going to extend beyond our own representatives and thanking them for what,
Just-
service to as our constituents.
I'm just thanking them for that one particular bill that turned into a law that he pushed for, that's all. And I think we can bring it to the full board.
Because
And
I
if they-
think you proposed bringing the other letters to a
Right.
discussion item, so we
Right,
can just
right.
put that in with
Put
all
that
of
in
them
with
to
them.
discuss
Yeah.
and see where the board lands on it all.
Sure.
So, but I thank you for bringing up ideas. I
Okay.
hear where you're coming from, and let's get the full board to weigh in on it at the appropriate time and place. Did you want to mention Senate Resolution 417 quickly, speaking of Dinniman? 'Cause that
Sure.
was-
So, Senate Resolution 417 authorizes the state. What committee is it, Amy? Is it the Education Committee to do the study?
No, it's the Joint State Government Commission.
Thank you. To do a school start time statewide study on logistics and obstacles. I guess the appetite for that. So that's
I think
pretty
it's
big
to
news.
basically synthesize all the research that's out there and come forth with a report and recommendation to present back to the Senate within 12 months. So that issue has risen to the state level. That was one of the other pieces that came through at the very 11th hour of the legislative session. So that's really a summary of what occurred. And does anybody have any questions or comments about that legislation? Okay. Well, then let's move into a subject we didn't get to dive in too deeply last time, which was a review of the 2017-18 committee goals we had set, how we've achieved those goals to this point, and what we think we might like to set as goals for this upcoming year. So, Mr. Petiti, will you walk us through that again?
Yes. This PowerPoint will look familiar because we did look at it last meeting. The reason why it's the same is because we didn't get to the planning portion of it. We kind of quickly went through the recap of last year's goals and progress, and so we decided to bring it back up one more time since we have a little more time today to look at it. So again, these were our goals from last year. I could tell you that the two at the bottom are similar to 16-17, and I'm sure we'll probably carry over. We can have that discussion tonight, but we'll carry over potentially into 18-19 because that is our ongoing work. This shows you in some detail how we address those three goals. Under the website accessibility section, you'll see the third bullet from the bottom. A 11-page audit report was submitted to the Office of Civil Rights over the summer. That report was a distillation of all the work and investigation done on the website to make sure that what's accessible gets identified and fixed, and so that's an ongoing process still. We still have about 17 more months left of work here to do around the website accessibility, just in terms of when the actual file, the investigation gets closed. We're making some serious and some pretty positive progress, I would think, there. For the action involving state education legislation, you'll recall that we passed 2 resolutions last year, one against arming school employees and another opposing voucher programs. And then as far as our outreach, I would say our most comprehensive effort would be when we went to have the community oppose the Homestead Exclusion Amendment to the PA Constitution. And while we weren't successful, I guess, statewide, and Ms. Goldman mentioned this last meeting, we did have about only 1,000 or so say yes to the amendment in Radnor, while 4,600 or so voted no. So we did have some nice turnout here for the position that we were advocating for here in Radnor. And then there's a bunch of other things that we had done throughout the year, attending legislative breakfast, hosting a legislative breakfast, etc. So as we look at our planning for this year, I just offered this timeline last meeting. Here's what it is again. Last year we did have 2 meetings of planning before we actually settled on the goals and approved them in November. And we could do all this in one night, of course, or we could continue that trend and have another couple meetings to discuss, whatever the board would like, or the committee would like. And I'll open it up to discussion about our potential goals.
Okay, so let's go around the table. Abby, do you have any feedback on the goals we accomplished? What you, as a member of the committee, based on that, think would be helpful from a student perspective? If you need more time to think about it, that's fine. We can just sort of starting over there and working around.
Do you need this?
Absolutely. Sarah Dunn, is there any feedback and ideas you'd like to share?
No, I think Mr. Petiti was right that the last 2 pretty much are our standing goals. I'm not aware of anything new right now. I do think the district is making concerted efforts on each of the different projects that are going on. So like the sleep study, the bleacher project. I know there's a lot of communication going on. I don't know that I think us stepping into that kind of muddies the waters and interferes with what are already very complicated processes. Right. I don't have anything very specific. I think we need to be ready to adjust as things come up this year. I'm sure, I think it'd be great if there were a statewide sleep study, and the state, I think a lot of the challenges we see are based on the fact that, we would be different from other districts. So I think as long as we're agile and recognizing that as legislation comes up, and I think the group's been pretty good at that, that we need to act to make sure people are aware of things, that's probably about where we belong.
Okay. So in other words, you're saying that if we were to set goals, numbers 2 and 3, you'd like to see as a repeat for 18-19? Mm-hmm.
I'm hoping that the first goal is not an issue anymore, that we've done what we need to do with OCR and...
Yes, there's going to continually be.
Some
this
follow-up.
is something we have to monitor as long as we have a website.
Okay.
But in terms of responding to the actual OCR complaint, we're well into the process and we're great progress. So I think we're fine with achieving that goal.
Okay.
It doesn't need to rise to the level of a goal for our committee
Right. Okay.
this year.
Yeah.
Let me go to Lydia, and then I'll come back to the co-chair. Lydia, do you have any feedback or ideas?
Well, I think the second goal and the third goal were really why this committee was established. But we don't have anything specific with regard to communication. But I don't know that district-wide there's anything that, is there anything that you would recommend that we should look at?
I mean, is it okay to have two goals? And is it okay to just focus on those two? Not the communication tasks won't happen. I mean, they, you talked about the sleep, the bleachers, all these things require communication support, and they, among other things. So that's always going to happen year after year. In terms of putting something on, as a formal goal for our committee, I mean, the two goals that are at the bottom there are pretty substantive as they are.
Really captures it.
But
yeah,
I'm open to others who may have experienced some communications, whatever over the past couple months that they kind of trigger. Maybe we can make that a goal for communications. I'm open.
No, I don't know that we need to make that. If I'm kind of more just relying on your expertise. I don't have a problem that I've noticed or identified, so I'm happy with that. I think that the nature of this committee is that we're supposed to meet if there's a hot button issue that would pertain to the second or third goal here, and that if there's not, then there would not be a meeting if there's not something that triggers something that we need to look at with regard to the district. So as long as these are written in a way that we're all in agreement that sort of satisfies that need. Is that how you see it? Or
Well, let me turn it over to Chuck and give him a chance for some feedback.
Well, specific feedback to that, I believe that this board or this committee should meet every month because you are prepared for what may or may not happen. If we wait until something comes out that we may be caught blindsided, I believe that we need to be there and be proactive. We have people now who are on PSBA, who are on the Legislative Council. We actually have a Section 8 leader with us here, so we will be in tune with what's happening, with what's going on. And I would like to see us take a more proactive role as we move forward than a reactive role. And I think that that's my idea of what this committee is actually for. Now, we may need to expand it if there is a hot topic that comes up. And at that point, I would tend to agree with you. Then you might need to expand that. If needed, I think it should be able to be expanded. I think that there's a role here for this committee moving forward, and I think it's an hour a meeting once a month. And if we do not have things that we can move forward and put on the agenda, then yes, then we can cancel it. To your point.
Well, I was going to say,
if we do not have something,
well,
doesn't necessarily have to be paramount, but if for some unknown reason we have nothing, then yes, then we wouldn't have to hold one. We shouldn't hold meetings just to hold meetings, and I would agree with you with that point.
But your idea of the way you stated that is not, it's not in sync with the whole committee structure. Because the committee structure for the boards are really to go through items that will then appear on the business agenda, and none of this will. And so this is an hour-long meeting, so we can have exactly this conversation, but there isn't really business on this agenda that would go forth to the business meeting. I'm just pointing out, and I see both sides of it, because I originally was one of the founding members of this, so obviously I believe in this committee, but it is not in sync with the operation of the rest of the school board committees.
I would agree.
But
it's not, but
Chuck,
that's the purpose of it.
And I think, though, so I agree with you that there's value in having a meeting every month. And I think, oh, sorry, that's really close to me. I think one of the things that was very interesting to me, wow, am I like getting cut?
I turned mine off and it made yours go crazy.
Okay. One of the things that was very interesting to me at the the Pennsylvania School Board Association's, the annual meeting that we had. So, and I'm so sorry you were sick and you missed it, because it was very interesting. So one of the things, and I'm kind of educating the public on this, I think Chuck and Amy know this piece. The representatives from all the school districts get together at the end of the meeting, or it was the end of the meeting this year, and we vote on a legislative platform for the Pennsylvania School Board Associations. And throughout the year, there were opportunities for different districts to submit proposals for things they thought we should be lobbying, or, our contributions to PSBA should pay for lobbying to our state legislature. And it's getting loud again. But there were certain things that people had proposed that didn't make it into the platform. There's a platform committee, and they draft, and the language comes out. And I was disappointed that we didn't get that. I'm not sure what happened over the course of the year. We seemed to have been without a representative, or people weren't sure who it was. So it was a shame as a school board we didn't see that and get to be part of it, because the GRCC could have been very active in helping with that. But one of the things that one of the school districts did, and it was very interesting to me because it seemed like something the GRCC could really be active in, was one of the districts came forward with an entire platform asking for the state legislature to help us fund mental health education. Not in the context of security, not in the context of opioid abuse, just making sure we're producing mentally healthy students. And this was a district that does have some opioid issues, but had some very significant concerns. And the shame of it, they had really come together very, very well prepared. And in order to even be heard at this legislative meeting, they had to get 2/3 of the people to vote to even discuss it. So they brought this beautiful resolution forward, and they only got 63% of the vote, and we never even got to discuss it. And so, like the state legislature, it went on hold for a whole nother year. But that was something that I personally reached out and said, look, I'm a school board member at Radnor, and I care a lot about mental health. And if that's something you want us to do, let me know, and I'll talk to the Government Relations Committee at Radnor, and we would like to try, and I think I can convince people there, knowing you and Lydia, I figured Amy would follow, that at least the committee would be interested in helping with things like that. So that, to me, when I said I don't think we need another goal, I think that falls under the third bullet in terms of advocacy and raising awareness. But I was very impressed, too, that there were boards that everything worked so smoothly. They had the time and the people with the interest and the energy, because it does take a lot, and I recognize that not all of our board members have that kind of time and energy, to really make those kinds of proposals and advocate for them. So I think that that's, in months where there's nothing going on, we can reach out to other districts who I know are putting together platforms like that and help them. We have community members who are very active and I'm sure would be happy to enter letter writing campaigns, and students who'd be interested. And to the extent we can give them ways to be aware, and or even keep it more narrow and just focus on getting PSBA to advocate for us, fine. But I think there are ways for us to fill at least a half hour every month. I don't really want to wade into the art because I kind of like only having to be here for a half hour because I sit on 3 committees.
Yeah, so do I. Tonight.
And I think that that's probably a broader conversation. I don't know if we have to have tonight, but I do think that there is value in meeting every month because I think there are things that we can be working on. It's a matter of being organized enough to know, we seem to have a quiet month. Does somebody have an issue they've heard about or someone they've talked to from another district that we could be looking at?
So I'm going to put Mr. Batchel on the spot. He just walked in and he hasn't heard this whole conversation. But Mr. Madden is pushing for monthly meetings. And you heard Ms. Dunn is supporting that. And I don't think I did a very good job of explaining why the GRCC, the way it's structured, does not fit in with the way the other committees of the board are structured. I tried to explain that because if an item isn't going through to the business meeting agenda, then in our typical committee structure, it wouldn't necessitate a meeting for the other committees. And so I think finance has canceled their meeting twice.
But that's why I was saying, if we were working on a piece of advocacy like that, that would obviously we can't just pass that along somewhere. We would need board approval to be acting as board members in that capacity.
But so we got into this by saying we think these last two goals encompass what we would like this committee to be. But I was saying if there isn't a specific item that we would be, as a board, wanting to speak up about, then we don't want to just have a committee where we run through, a list of bills that have been introduced in Harrisburg. That's really not what a school board committee is supposed to be about. So, I wanted you to have an opportunity to share your opinion on that. Because
Well, before you share your opinion, you might as well hear both sides of the, or do you want to share yours based on half of the conversation?
Go for it, Chuck.
Okay?
I'm always good at yielding to a board member there, Chuck, so go ahead.
I think my point is that this is different than the other committees, and I do agree. I also believe that a lot of stuff that we discuss will not be brought to the board for board action. I mean, it's really more or less, it's a communication piece, and it's some of the different governments, some of the other school districts that are doing things, we get that message out. Okay, so sometimes what we're doing, which may be important to us and to our students, will not go to our board to have a vote, because we're not going to expend money on it, we're not going to do this and things like that. So yes, there will be times when it won't. And traditionally, most of the stuff that we discussed hasn't come back. We've only did the 2 resolutions, so we've done some very important work, but it's not that everything we do goes back to the board for a vote. My point was if in order for us to continue and to be proactive on what's happening on the educational levels, that we need to have, I go with an hour, a half an hour meeting to me with 2 public participation segments does not allow us to get our business done. And thinking back, I was the person that brought the communication person in. We at one time hired a part-time. That person was part-time. I was the one that wanted that person to be here. I was the one that sat on the interviews. I was the one that brought that person in. And that morphed into your position, which is very, very important. We didn't realize it at the time, but it is very important. But we don't have a lot of things, even with the communication, that we're going to come back to the board to vote upon. So it's a different committee, and I understand, and I agree with you that it's different than the other standing committees that we have. Although I would say there are times when it can be very valuable to the other committees. For instance, if they're talking about the Plan Con, and we have some information from Upper Darby who's spearheading some of the issues about that, that could be helpful to come through our government relations and communications, discussing what other districts are doing. And it may not come back to us because it's not something that's hot on our topic, but it's something that we can spread out through communication. I just see value in it. That's all.
All right. I have lots of interesting perspectives, and this is great that we had the time to actually talk about them pretty thoroughly. And I think what everybody's contributed is valuable. Legislation is in and of itself a whole different animal from a lot of the other things that we do here in our function as a district. And legislation isn't the kind of thing that is actionable quickly or that often. We just mentioned how at the end of the legislative session, only 5 to 7% of all pieces of legislation that had been introduced over the course of 2 years actually became law. So while I hear the 2 different points of view, my question would be, if we're not actively discussing in a consistent way some of the legislation that could potentially impact us, how practical is it for us to just sort of convene when all of a sudden something's coming down the pike? And how effective would we be to do something like push back on a proposed constitutional amendment that, had we not been tracking it, we'd ever be able to organize around what we did? I think it's when an alternative is proposed, we have the devil's in the details. So who would be that person then if this committee were, for all intents and purposes, sort of disbanded, I guess, because if you're not meeting regularly, who would be the person who would be willing to track that for us?
Who would say what's important enough to convene a meeting?
who would?
That varies on different.
So, I mean, I don't have an answer, but I just, you know, that I think that there are ideas in my experience, and then there's execution. And so I just ask everybody to think about how the various ideas would be executed in order to come up with some kind of solution.
So this has been something that I know we have discussed, as a board for over a year, and I think all the points are well taken. We have had a focus on identifying district goals and having the board identify district goals, and I really commend the board for identifying goals the last 2 years. In that process of identifying goals, identifying priority projects, we are a very ambitious group, and I think that is wonderful. But our ambitions, and as a group, a lot of type A personalities, when we don't designate and decide what are our goals and what are our priority projects each year, it's easy to lose focus. And we can't do everything at once every year. And it's important for us as a district to identify what are those things that are a priority in that particular year, what are those things that are a priority project, and make sure we do them well. And I think that is what has probably led to some of this conversation too, is that the idea that anything that goes to our board meeting, we have talked about, needs to come through a committee meeting. That there should be opportunities for the board, opportunities for our public, opportunities for our administration and our staff to hear those things first at a committee meeting, to hear those things discussed for board members to then decide, is it something that's then ready to move on to the business meeting for then a board vote. And really looking at that focus of what things should be on, board agendas, what things, because, we can see how things can take so much of our time. So I think that's part of that discussion about, if a committee doesn't have things that aren't pertinent to need to be discussed for that, that's something that's a voting item for a board. Certainly there are areas where there are things that are updates, which is appropriate. But we've tried to give more focus to our committee meetings. So that's been part of it. And then with the reorg last year, there was some discussion with board members about, with GRCC, do we always have things each month, or is it something that should be handled more ad hoc, or handled with info sessions, or handled when we do see a piece of legislation or something that where we want to, as a board, get involved in? Should we be then scheduling meetings and opportunities for board members to hear? I think there was some concern from some board members a year ago just about the amount of time and serving on committees, and how do we balance that? I think the compromise in all of that was the half hour was set up just based on, do we want to try to do it ad hoc? Do we want to try to do it a half hour each month? And in that discussion, it was, okay, let's try the half hour. Now I think we're hearing that some feel the half hour is not enough, and I think that point's well taken, that, do we need more? I think that when we did the info session on, gosh, what was it, SB?
Senate Bill 2.
Senate Bill 2, SB 2, right? Yeah. I think that was, I thought that was a good use of time. I thought that was a valuable use of time for board members, valuable use of time for, for the way we handled it with administration and the opportunity for the public. So I think we as a board need to just discuss, do we want to move forward with it as a half hour? Do we want to move forward with it as an hour? Do we want that option of a half hour and then we schedule longer meetings when needed because there is something coming up? I think that we're all those different options could be appropriate. I think it is important that when it comes to the legislative aspect, we do need to monitor it. We do, I think we have a duty, we have a role to make sure that we are paying attention to what's happening, educationally, and recognize when there are opportunities for us as a board to, step forward and let the state, let our legislature, let the Department of Education know how we stand on those things. There's often many ways for us to do that, though, too. We have many opportunities to do that.
I agree with everything that you're saying, and I feel like that's really the, I think, crux of the question for me. I believe that this committee is really effective in being ahead of the curve legislatively, and we've had some initiatives that have shown that. And I think that is a direct byproduct of having a formal group that's dedicated to monitoring, following legislation. And while that might not produce in the traditional sense a committee output, which is a board action item, it does help us be ahead of the curve of state legislation particularly that could have really significant consequences for us as a district. We're not always successful in pushing back on some of those things, and sometimes we are. If not for this committee, like I said earlier, my question is, who's going to be doing that? Because that's something that I would personally need to understand better in order to feel comfortable that our responsibility, as you said, as a district to monitor state and federal legislation is being done. And I just would need to better understand how that would be done if not for this committee meeting on a regular basis, because I do believe that our agendas always include updates on what's going on, and we talk about, is there something that we want to handle? You can't do it overnight. Generally, that would need to come to before the full board, but we certainly have to have those discussions here. And with the way legislation goes, one thing that you think may be coming up for a vote the next week could end up coming up 24 hours from now. It could take 3 months. It's a very difficult thing to track. So it really requires, in my opinion, some kind of ongoing focus. And the question is, if we believe that that's important, how are we going to do that, if not for this committee?
So I don't hear you saying get rid of the committee. I don't hear anybody saying get rid of the committee at all. I think it's a matter of making sure we're making efficient use of valuable school district resources and personal time. I think, and maybe it's not, well, maybe we have some time today. Maybe it's a matter of setting sub-goals, right? When we see what the legislation is that is generally being proposed, saying, these are things we have opinions on, these are things that don't affect us, that we don't think affect us, and then going to the board and saying, look, we wanted to update you, this is what we're looking at. Knowing that at a certain point in the spring, PSBA is going to come out with their legislative platform requests again, meeting, the month in advance of that, proposing some things so that we can make sure, and, mapping out a time frame to make sure if we want to propose something that we have a session here to draft and that we have time to take it to the board, because we know sometimes these things can be very sensitive, depending on how, politically motivated they appear to be. And I think that it's, but so it may be that not every month we do need a full hour, but maybe we know when things are coming up and we notify the team and say, hey, look, it looks like this month would be a good month to do some drafting. Based on personal calendars, does it seem like we could get in here at 4 and try to work on some drafting? And it's, and it's really like, okay, can we put it up on the screen? Michael, can you type and stuff like that? But other months where we're just kind of waiting to see what's going on in the legislature, we come in for a general checkup and do a half hour. Is it possible to work from that standpoint, do you think?
Yeah, I just want to make sure that we're all on the same page, because I hear a bunch of different interpretations of the conversation, and maybe for my own clarity it would be helpful. But I don't think disbanding the committee, if I misconstrued that, I don't think I ever heard about, was under the impression that the committee would be disbanded. I think the question was, should the committee have the discretion when it feels it should to meet every month, and how much time should those meetings, how long should those meetings be, half an hour or an hour? So I think there are a couple different schools of thought here. I'm getting the sense that some people think it should be a standing monthly meeting.
But I wasn't hearing anything less than monthly. Did I misunderstand? Maybe I misunderstood that.
No, I was saying that. If there is just going to be an update, a list of these are bills before the House or the Senate in Harrisburg, that I don't think that we should have a meeting. I think that it should be driven by the urgency of something that we think we need to take action on.
And I'm going to play devil's advocate here and say, if the first time I hear about it is in one of these meetings and then you want me to say whether or what I actually think about it, then you're asking me to trust that someone else on this committee has done enough research and that I don't need to go read it on my own or do any other kind of thinking in kind of separate downtime about what it is we're talking about. And I say that only because the agendas aren't super detailed. It doesn't say what all the bills are we're going to talk about, so I don't necessarily know when I'm walking in the door what it is we're going to talk about to go out and do my own research, and I actually do that for most of the things on our agenda. So like, it would be hard to come in as an informed person unless I've kind of heard about it over the time and say, okay, well now I know this bill may be coming up. It'd be good for me to look and watch.
Well, and I think it might be in the balance. I think Lydia's in the difficult, position as board president, as she was assigning, committees. Gosh, it's almost a year ago. Time does fly. Yeah. Years fly, but the days are long, right? As president, she was in the position of trying to assign, board members to committees, and there was some feeling a year ago about, does it need to be an hour? There were board members just concerned that the topics and how maybe we're handling some of those agendas, did we need an hour each month? I think everybody agreed that the times we came together on the resolutions were very valuable and good uses of time. I think it's that balance that we're trying to create, that when we don't have items, or if we have an hour meeting, are we willing sometimes to have a meeting where there aren't things? I mean, some board member right now, I shouldn't guess, I should never speak for board members, but there's 9 individuals on this board. Somebody's watching this right now, and I'm sure one of our board members is going, wow, see, they don't need an hour. Look, they're spending all this time just talking about whether they need time. Is this really a committee that needs a full hour? There's somebody will do that. I mean, that's okay. I think we need to look at it and say, what is on those agendas? If it is a half hour or an hour, what are those things that, right now we're monthly every half hour. If we're saying that we need monthly an hour, then, are there times where it doesn't need to be an hour? Or, what are those things that are on the agenda? Because I agree with you, Sarah, you need to have a heads up. But at the same time, we have to strike that balance that we were hearing from board members a year ago about when it was an hour, they felt like there were sometimes meetings that things were on the agenda that weren't as practical. So I think it's trying to strike that balance in there.
Well,
is that fair?
And so to address your concern, I guess it is concern or thought, would it not be useful to read those things, have it be part of the things that are circulated to us, so that everybody on the board is able to keep up on those things? But if it's just going to be, here's an update on where each of these things stand, and nothing's really changed on them, which has happened quite a few times throughout the year, that, well, this one bounced back here, or so-and-so changed this on that one, but nothing really moved forward. I'm not sure that it's useful for us to just keep churning those up, because we can't do anything about those at that point.
I don't think that's an unfair point. I absolutely understand your point. And I think, look, the administrators that we have here, all of the staff from the school district have other things that they could be doing, and I appreciate that. So when there aren't changes, I understand that. I do think it's important for us to kind of understand what's going on. And, I get the PSBA legislative update because I'm the liaison now. So, certainly, look, if this committee didn't exist, let's go to worst case scenario, right? I'd still probably get together with Amy and Chuck for lunch at some point or coffee at some point and talk about this stuff. Part of the purpose of this meeting, right, is to make sure that it's on the public record and our public knows what's going on. So if they have concerns, they can come in and say to us, hey, I heard you talk last month about SB2, and I did or didn't like the way you were going with this. So it's not that nobody would do it. It's a matter of making sure we're doing it in a public setting. The 3 of us can meet anytime we want. It doesn't violate the Right to Know Act, and we can talk about all the school board stuff we want. But because some of us have nothing else in our lives. Well,
we're in, again, talk about time flying. We're in November, and we're going to have a board reorganization, as required by law in December, that discussion. I think I'm hearing loud and clear from our 2 chairs right now, our chair and our, from our leadership of this committee, from both Amy and Chuck, that you would prefer an hour each month.
If an hour's needed, we would schedule an hour. If we're done in 45 minutes, we're finished. And then we have some time in between to go get a cup of coffee before my next meeting starts, okay? But if we have a half an hour and we want public participation, and we have to limit our discussion on our goals because we have a half an hour, it's just not productive. If you're going to meet, okay, if I'm going to go someplace and I'm going to be there, whether I stay for a half an hour or an hour makes very little difference to me. To me, personally, it does
look
not.
dapper today.
Okay? So I think that one thing that we have to understand is this committee has built a reputation. We've been invited to speak before the Senate Education Committee on Keystones. We've been invited to participate as a participant in discussions about the education in Pennsylvania. We've actually done things out there that other people see us as valuable, okay? And that's not because we push things to our board to vote on. It's because of the discussions that we have and because of the things that we do outwardly and the communication of what we're doing. I think it's incredibly important. I think it's a missed opportunity if we don't. Not everybody has this because it's different. It doesn't fit into the school board structure 101. We're kind of thinking a little bit outside of the box, and I'm very proud of the fact that we do. Now, do we need 4 people on this? No, we do not. We don't need 4 people. We can have that further discussion. If you have issues with staffing the committees, they don't need to have 4 people on it. We can look at rearranging that so they just have 3 people who are interested. If somebody's not interested in being on any committee, they shouldn't be on it. That would be the way that I feel about it. So.
I'll have what he had. Yes. I just want to circle back to Ms. Adicula over there because she put off her comment until she had a chance to think about it. So, Abby, do you have some thoughts?
I have several questions. A couple with what the goals say up here. So it mentions the strategic goal areas of a comprehensive plan. Where can that be found, and who decides what is impacting those goals? Like, who creates the schedule where we decide what we're going to be talking about and how we're spending this time?
Okay, so for strategic goal areas and comprehensive plan, we can, maybe Mr. Petiti can go over that with you after the meeting
That's fine.
or something like that. Would that be a good idea? And in terms of setting the agenda for individual committee meetings, that usually is done in combination. The committee leadership meets prior to the meeting with the administrative liaison to the committee, and that's where the agenda is set.
Okay. So,
Well, hold on, and then it goes through a final, so we meet in leadership each week, so that's the president, the vice president, and the superintendent, and we go over the proposed agendas for all the committees.
for all the committees?
Yes.
Okay. I also agree, I think, Ms. Dunn, you brought up the level of information that is included in these packets, and I agree that it'd help if they were more detailed, especially because I do like to research ahead of time what we're looking up, and I was trying to find information that we could discuss. I couldn't find any documents, but also I saw this. That leads me to another question. So when it went, there was a slide that detailed the first couple of months, and I feel like I don't know, a lot of the time was spent discussing the goals of the year, but the goals are pretty general. They're very good goals, but are we going to have any specific goals, or are those going to come up as new problems arise? Or
Good question, and I think maybe what we'll do in December, we had a 2-part goal conversation last year, right, Mr. Petiti? So maybe we can put a pin in Abby's question and revisit it in December so that we don't have to rush through it, because they were really good questions, and we want to make sure that we wrap up our meeting on time today. Mr. Batchelor, you have something to add?
No, I was just going to say thank you, Abby, and that I think when Mr. Petiti meets with you, he can talk to you, too, about what are the district goals. And then one piece of the district goals and priority projects each year is also looking at how those district goals and priority projects then fit into committees, and then what is the focus then of each committee as well. And then also, particular to this committee, what is the focus when it comes to looking at legislation and what's happening on the state level. So that might help try to see how it does work all in concert. But those are really good questions.
So we have those questions somewhere. Hopefully they're recorded, because I'm not good at listening and writing at the same time. So hopefully they're captured somewhere, and we'll revisit them in December. And you, Mr. Petiti, can get together and he can give you a whole committee 101 School District 101, which is a great orientation. So with that, I know we have new
I know, and one last thing, and if there's things, Abby, that you think from a student perspective we should be looking at, share that with Mr. Petiti. Or share
Yeah, I
that
just
with,
have a couple more comments.
Yeah, with Mr. Bechtold or myself. We would be very interested to hear if there's things that our students, especially when it comes to things on a, on the level of legislation or things that are impacting our student body, we'd be interested in hearing.
Okay, thank you.
Can we revisit with Abby as one of our agenda items for next month as the student voice? As might have some interesting things to say. Okay. She did have interesting things to say, and sounds like there's a ton of more behind that too, which is fabulous. So new business. Did you have something quickly, Sarah, you wanted to mention?
I did really quickly. We have gotten an invitation from the Public Citizens for Children and Youth, the coordinator for Montgomery and Delaware County, that Delaware counties, this weekend, November 17th, from 9 a.m. to noon, just in King of Prussia, there's a summit. It's called PA Schools Work for schools issues, educational issues across the state, and they're going to meet with local and statewide representatives. So if you have interest in that, reach out. I think Mr. Petiti do you have the information on this? If you don't, let me just read it. The summit location for this southeast region this weekend, again, on the 17th from 9 a.m. to noon, is at American Reading Company, 201 South Gulf Road, King of Prussia. There is a registration, so I'll forward that link to you. But I think, the community, anyone interested in education is welcome to attend.
And that includes students.
Absolutely.
I know there will be some students there too, so maybe we can circulate that.
Oh, right next to Home Depot, Chuck said.
Okay. All right, great. Thank you, Sarah. Any other new business, or should we move into final public comment? Is there any final public comment? No? Oh, yes? Yes?
Yes, no,
Thank you, Cindy Spurtle and Wayne. After the end of the hour and the discussion, is it my understanding that the first 2017-18 goal has been scratched for 18-19? Is that correct?
We didn't do anything yet.
The,
We didn't do anything.
You didn't do anything?
We discussed
You
it,
didn't-
but we didn't take any action on anything, to
It
my
wasn't
knowledge.
decided to not, since the training for the vision has already been completed in the civil rights? Okay.
We
you didn't
might,
do-
but
Okay. I'd also like to thank Abby for excellent questions and would like to hear the answers to those questions in public. And I believe one of her first questions was where the strategic goals and what was the second half of that, Abby? You did such a great job. Where is it found? In other words, it's the comprehensive plan of the school. And that was not answered, so I'd like to hear all those in the next meeting. Thank you.
Great. Any other public comment?
Judy Sherry. I too would like to commend Abby. I appreciated her looking for some specificity in the goals. When I look at these goals, I wonder how would you know that you didn't achieve them? Because what happens is it becomes a list of things that falls under the goals that you've done, not necessarily a goal that you've accomplished. And finally, I'd like to know what other school districts in Pennsylvania only respond to the public by posting answers to questions once a month. I'd like to know how common this practice is. It's kind of disappointing sometimes that things are brought up that are never, ever mentioned at the meeting. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Is there any other public comment? Nope. Okay, then we will see you next month. Thank you, everyone.